A Shalom Akim Shabbat Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Makakadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone for teaching us truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquath that may listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to go through a little bit of exhortation. I can be a bit personal in regards to forgiving your parents. And, a lot of us, as young men and young women, we tend to hold on to a lot of the emotional baggage of some of the things that our parents might have done to us, whether it might be growing up, and then that comes and trickles down into our walk. It trickles down into our lives, right? It trickles down into the way we look at ourselves and making certain decisions, right? And the way we view ourselves in terms of self-esteem and self-image. You know what I'm saying? Like, so a lot of these things we might hold a negative sort of mind frame towards our parents, but really and truly, it's we're blessed to have this understanding, and to be able to be cleansed, because if you think about it as well, those things were pretty much as a necessary evil so we can have our physician to come and heal us, right? Yahweh Shai said it himself. He said, they that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. I have come not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance, right? So, as much as uncomfortable a lot of these situations were, what would be the point of going to and having a physician in the first place? Because the point of a physician is really to heal you, right? In order to be healed, you had to be, that also implies that you had to be sick. You had to have some type of bugged out mindset. Something happened between you or your father or your mother within your childhood, right? And all these, plethora of different problems. It gives you it allows an opportunity to be held. Healed by the words of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, right? Because Yahweh Shai is playing the role, in our lives as a physician, right? So just to magnify his importance, right? So, and remember also, they're under the curses too, right? Because we have this understanding that we are under curses, but it doesn't resolve. It doesn't the fact that we know that doesn't mean that the curses go away, right? So I want to read a couple precepts in regards to forgiving your parents, and and exemplifying certain fruits of the spirit. It's so we can have essentially a pleasing sacrifice, a respectable sacrifice. Remember, like the sacrifice, and you compare the ones between our forefather, Abel and his brother Cain, right? The Lord had respect unto Abel's sacrifice, and we know, pursuant to Romans, the 12th chapter, we are, we are, our lives are a sacrifice. When you look at it, right? So, so I want to start here. I wanted to just read Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, and I'll read verse 54 in the NLT, and it says, "The most tender-hearted man among you will have no compassion for his own brother, his beloved wife, and his surviving children. He will refuse to share with them the flesh of his devouring, the flesh of one of his own children, because he has nothing else to eat during the siege and terrible distress that your enemy will afflict on all your towns," right? So this is the behavior, and this is the as a result, because of our disobedience, this is the end result, right? So looking at these situations, remember that you tend to have a little bit more understanding. You have more closure, spiritual closure, in regards to why a lot of these situations happen. Remember, they're still under curses as well, because as it says in Hosea, because the Lord rejected wisdom, I shall essentially reject thee and thy children, right? To roughly paraphrase. So that trickled down onto the way that they handled a lot of our situations, growing up, right? And a lot of us might hold on to a lot of that emotional baggage, of whatever happened, not to say that we forget it, but we can still pick it apart and also use the opportunity, thinking about it in these times to actually exemplify pleasing, righteous sacrifices, if you really think about it. Because meditate and think about a lot of these things that are coming to pass, right? You have all these things coming to pass. You have wars and rumors of wars. You have Egyptian against Egyptian. You have the love of many beginning to wax cold. You're having essentially what's it called, sedition, people are not regarding the kings and the princes, right? You see all these things happening, right? So what is also part of our conversation? What is also part of our manner of life, right? The way we essentially live our lives, right? So this is just another aspect to a godly life, right? Let me get First Peter's. This is First Peter chapter 4, verse 7. And it says, "But the end of all things is at hand, and be therefore sober and watch unto prayer," right? So we see all these things happening that's going on in the world. We see all these different situations brewing, nations rising up against nation, the tiny tops, they're being they're continuously looking, and they're being called out, and they're being essentially despised by the other nations. So we see a lot of these prophecies, occurring during these particular times, right? So I'm reading this to show that, as we see all these things, we want to offer up, something pleasing to the Lord, because in these times, we can have essentially, the Lord remember us for some of the things we did, during these times of grace, and bringing it back to the topic, we trying to offer up something pleasing, essentially a sweet smelling savor unto the Lord, because, we want the Lord to essentially remember us in those times of wrath, of, famine, right? All these things are happening. So we essentially want to be remembered. As Habakkuk said, I've heard thy speech and I was afraid. In wrath, remember mercy, right? We want the Lord to remember mercy upon us, right? Because we're merely just worms. We're sheep in the midst of wolves, right? So this is part of it. If you have the opportunity to do so, and it comes up to forgive your parents, whatever it is they might have done, they might have name called you, they might have disrespected you, they might have they might have whatever it was, right? Speaking from experience, my parents called me a Freemason, but that doesn't mean that I am going to get carnal, because that's what Satan wants you to do. Satan wants you to get carnal, right? It's just to remain and keep the fight in the spiritual zone, right? Because remember, when you go back into David's story, David had the opportunity to enact his own vengeance upon King Saul, right? But the scriptures say his heart smote him, right? His conscience kicked in, right? So conscience, con with science knowledge. So the Lord, he had the spirit to be able to, like, okay, let me pull back. This don't even feel right, you know. And he had a guy there was one instance he had a guy whispering, this is your chance, because remember, Saul threw javelins at David, right? That's crazy. You think about a javelin, you think about the Olympics, man. Those long tools they used to, they use in the Olympics, and being that we were bigger back then, it was probably a lot bigger back then. So imagine seeing that, right? And just using that and using your imagination, right? And but the point is, David kept it spiritual, right? In our instance, they may have done certain things that wasn't, it wasn't, pleasing, but you don't use it as an opportunity to, enact your own vengeance, seeking out your own vengeance, upon them, right? The point is, they may ask you, okay, they may have done X, Y, and Z, and then by the way you move, the way you conduct yourself, the way you walk uprightly, that might cause them and stir them to inquire, because they might need you for counsel, they might need you for a ride, they might need you for whatever it is. If that opportunity comes up, take it and do it, right? You're not losing anything by doing so. So just something to keep in mind, right? This is verse 8. And above all things, have fervent charity amongst yourselves, for charity covereth a multitude of sins, right? And it's not like we don't have sins to pay for, So, if you have the opportunity to exemplify charity for your parents, they might, hey, can you help me to, move a couch? Hey, can you send me a barrel? Can you send me some, gifts? Whatever it is, like, if the shoe fits, wear it, right? You can use your imagination, right? And charity is not limited to just money. Keep that in mind too, right? So the opportunity presents itself, take it, and the Lord can easily remember you for just the way they might have done this and that and the X and Y and Z to you, but you didn't take it as an opportunity to recompense essentially evil for evil. And I think Paul touches on that as well, right? We're not going to do that, So just something to keep in mind, right? So I want to go to this is Sirach chapter 28, verse 1, and it says, he that revengeth shall find vengeance from the Lord, and he will surely keep his sins in remembrance. Forgive thy neighbor the hurt that he hath done unto thee, so shall thy sins also be forgiven when thou prayest, right? So, we have sins that, we want the Lord to forgive us, for. That's another reason to capitalize on the opportunity, if you have the opportunity to do good unto them, by all means, do it. Some brothers may not have that opportunity. Some brothers, they might have, their parents might be in the spirit world. Some brothers might just have their dad or might just have their mom, or if you have both, by all means, they ask you, hey, can you help me, to, move some furniture. They might be getting up old in age. Remember, they get old too. They're getting up in age. They're losing their mental strength. By all means, you take it as an opportunity to do so, right? And that's charity right there. That's bonus points right there, right? So this is verse. Where was I? Verse 3. One man beareth hatred against another, and doth he seek pardon from the Lord? He seek no mercy to a man which is like himself, and doth he ask forgiveness for his own sins, right? So this is the mindset, like, yo, you know, we're seeking like this thing, like think of it like this, you know, you're in a situation where, okay, you have uh, um your father or your mother or whoever, you know, and for the sake of this lesson, they're asking you forgive them, you know, they're sorry, whatever, right? And they're holding, and I'm sorry, you're holding a grudge, and then therefore on, then you go home and you pray at night and you're asking the Lord to forgive you. It's like, why don't you forgive your parents? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, man. Yeah, man. We need forgiveness too, man. Remember that, you know, and that keeps the humility in check, right? We need forgiveness too, man. So don't hold on to grudges, right? You know, it's gonna do you very little good, right? Because if the Lord actually had to calculate how much sins we had to pay for, we'd be finished, right? As a matter of fact, let me get this in Job. 1 second. Then I'll go back to Sirach. This is Job 11:6, and it says, and that he would show thee the secrets of wisdom, that they are double to that which is. Know therefore that the Most High, Yahweh Bashmel Shai, exacteth of thee less than thine iniquity deserveth, right? So, you know, these things, we, and listen, man, like, yo, we don't, yeah, we don't, it's just, yeah, it's just the tab that we were unable to pay for, right? If the Lord has had to calculate how much sins from this life, past lives, you know, it's innumerable, right? So we need mercy, right? So this is just to keep in mind, you know, if the opportunity presents itself to exemplify, to forgive your parents, you know, they may not believe, you know, and they may not even believe, right? You know, don't try and force them to become believers, right? You know, but they could be, they end up might just be becoming believers just by the way you move, right? Just by the way you conduct yourself. The scriptures say a man shall be known by his walk, right? Think about that, right? Let me go back to Sirach 28. Let's see here. I'll read verse 4 again, and it says, showeth no mercy to a man which is like himself, and doth he ask forgiveness of his own sins, and if he that is but flesh nourish hatred, who will entreat the pardon for his own sins? Remember thine end, and let enmity cease. Remember corruption and death, and abide in the commandments, right? So we don't want to have that malicious, that spirit. As a matter of fact, I think it says that in the next verse, and it says, remember the commandments and bear no malice to thy neighbor. Remember the covenant of the highest and wink at ignorance, right? So that malice, it's going to do us a little good. And bring it back to King Saul and King David. Look at the malice that, this is your own kin that he had towards David, right? And he started becoming a lot more carnal, right? So we don't want to be like that, so, and even bringing into the parable Yahushua spoke about with the servants, right? The servant went to his other fellow servants, and he grabbed him by the throat. He's like, pay me what thou owest, right? So, we don't want to, yeah. We need mercy. That's the point, so if the opportunity presents itself, by all means do so, right? Because, we also need mercy ourselves. I guess I'll end off with this one in Zephaniah. uh, 3. 1 second. This is Zephaniah 2 and 3, and it says, Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be that ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. Right? So that's really the objective here. To be hid from all this calamity and wrath. The scriptures talk about how there's a sword being sharpened, to make a sore slaughter, right? So it's all these different calamities. We need protection in these times. I can't stress that, enough, right? So anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but if the opportunity presents itself, by all means take it. Take it, just take it. All right. So I'll leave the lesson there, but Lord's will, as always, that this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shabbat Shalom.